Go ahead and take a seat, and let's go ahead and open our Bibles to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11 through 18. This will form the foundation for our messaging this morning, and we're taking a look at the concept of generations. This is something that God invented. God did this on purpose so that we can pass on the wisdom that we have gained, the experiences that we have gained to future generations. And when we separate and carve ourselves out into little groups and slots, we're often not open to hearing some of the wisdom that others have experienced. And it's not just a unidirectional way. It's not just that from the older and more experienced folks that we gain wisdom and insight. Sometimes we as older and experienced folks gain wisdom and insight from those younger than us. And we learn things from them that we wouldn't otherwise know about. And so let's take a look at Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11, because Paul writes about how God breaks down barriers and how God brings people together. He writes this: "Don't forget that you Gentiles used to be outsiders. You were called the uncircumcised heathens by the Jews, who were proud of their circumcision, even though it only affected their bodies, not their hearts. In those days you were living apart from Christ. You were excluded from citizenship among the people of Israel. And you did not know the covenant promises God had made to them. You lived in this world without God and without hope. But now you've been united with Christ Jesus. Once you were far away from God, but now you've been brought near to Him through the blood of Christ. For Christ Himself has brought peace to us. He united Jews and Gentiles into one people, when in His own body, on the cross, He broke down the wall of hostility that separated us. He did this by ending the system of law with its commandments and regulations. He made peace between Jews and Gentiles by creating in Himself one new people from the two groups. Together as one body, Christ reconciled both groups to God by means of His death on the cross, and our hostility toward each other was put to death. He brought this good news of peace to you Gentiles who were far away from Him, and the peace to the Jews who were near. Now all of us can come to the Father through the same Holy Spirit because of what Christ has done for us." Inside your service bulletins, you will find a half sheet, that are our sermon notes for today. So as we take this journey together in God's Word, we'll be able to fill in these blanks as we go along. There's also space here for you to be able to write down some of the things that God will be speaking into your heart and into your life this morning. We're going to be taking a look at Mark chapter 3. That's my bad. I know inside the notes it says John 3. It should be Mark 3. Pastors sometimes get it wrong. So there we go. We make the correction. And so if you want to cross that out in your notes and put in Mark 3:34, that would be just great. Now, this passage that we just got done reading about, I think is so applicable to today, because that's one of the things about the Bible. It's applicable to every generation. And the reason for that is that the human condition really never changes. We really go through cycles and seasons, and some of those may last centuries at a time, but we always find ourselves kind of in a cyclical spiral. Solomon talked about it this way. He said, "Vanity of vanities, all is vain." In other words, life is meaningless. It's just the same old thing being repeated over and over again. If you have that long view of history, you begin to see that the mistakes that were made in the past are the ones that are going to be made today and into the future. And one of the reasons why we continue to make those mistakes and fall into those traps is because we don't learn from the generations that have gone before us. And that's the power of the Bible, is to show us, as I said, that the human condition has not changed. Here's the human condition. We are broken, we are lost, and we know how we got there. We've talked about this enough. You know how human beings got broken. It wasn't God's fault, it wasn't God's doing. We brought this on ourselves, And yet God didn't just leave it that way. The big change comes here at the cross, where God enters into our world, becomes one of us. I mean, think about that. Just think about that for a second. The eternal God, the Son of God, and all that that is. And we can't even begin to comprehend what that's like. But think about this, that God loves us so much and cares about this broken and tortured world so much, and knew that we could never, because of what sin has done to us, it's created a wall of hostility. It's created a barrier between us and God. You don't believe that? Go off the rails for a little bit and then ask yourself, how am I feeling with God right now? Now the thing is, God hasn't changed how he feels about you. You've changed because you feel the guilt, you feel the shame, you feel the isolation that comes from doing something you shouldn't be doing, the behaviors, the patterns, whatever, the lifestyle things that put you at odds with God. It's not that God's at odds with you, it's that you're at odds with God and you feel it. We can break it down even to a more closer analogy, and that is between husbands and wives when there's a falling out, right? And what was once just easy, open conversation is fraught with landmines of gotchas and I told you so's, and you better watch out about what you're saying. Did you mean it this way even when you didn't mean it that way? Am I resonating, folks? Isn't it true that our brokenness creates walls that separate us? And that's true with God. It's not that God builds these walls, it's what sin does. God is the one who's bringing down the walls, wants to bring those walls down. And in a culture that is constantly creating personal firewalls and distancing each other from one another, and then experiencing the consequences of that loneliness and wondering, why are we as a culture so alone? Why are we so depressed? Why are we so frustrated? And we're not drawing the connection, and that is when we disconnect from others, this is what happens. We were not made to be self-sufficient in the sense that I don't need anybody. I can do whatever I need to do. I'm a standalone person, self-contained. Hate to break your bubble, but you're not. Actually, I'm glad to break your bubble, because that kind of thinking is what leads to that isolation, that loneliness. You don't put yourself out there for people, and people don't, after a while, they're going to get the signal. They're going to see the big stop sign on your face, and eventually they're just going to leave you alone and have nothing to do with you because you don't want to have anything to do with them. And that's what leads to loneliness and isolation. And this is one of the big perils of social media. I call it unsocial media. It's a great place for people to hide behind and become those great keyboard warriors who keyboard tough guys, and just able to just spew out what's ever in their hearts. And if you ever, I don't do social media. I don't. And it's not because I'm older and I don't dig it. It's just not my thing. To me, it's not social. It's very gossipy. It's very run people down, all under the guise of being social. I don't do that. And I don't have time to get on there and try to be maybe that leavening force that maybe I could be. I don't know. I don't have time for that, Maybe I should. But I'm counting on you guys. For those of you who are in those mediums, you have a better track record. You've got a following already, right? Maybe you can just work with the following that you got. But the point being is that we as a culture are lonely, isolated, and angry. And beloved, I can tell you this, it's not because I'm a prophet. It's only going to get worse the more that we do it. It's just going to get worse. Because we're not made to be this way. God made us to be able to connect with each other. And Jesus understands how, even as broken people, we sometimes let each other down. We don't live the life that we should with others. We don't always say the right things. But the church is supposed to be a little bit different in that we strive to be the kind of person who doesn't do those things. But when we do, we have the courage and the strength to be able to go to the person that we've hurt and say, I'm really sorry. Or if we're unaware that we've hurt them and they come and say, when you said this or when you did this, and you realize, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize. No, you're right. No, you're right. I am really sorry. Satan doesn't want you to experience that. You know that, don't you? He doesn't want you to experience the power of forgiveness, of a relationship that maybe was on its way to going really south. And then all of a sudden, because someone was able to step a little bit outside themselves and say, man, I am sorry. Or when told that they've kind of crossed a line, to be able to say, oh, you know what? You're right. I was wrong. Satan doesn't want you to discover how liberating and how much that builds community. Community doesn't come from perfect people getting together. Community comes from broken people learning to get along with each other, learning the rules and treating each other well, but also knowing that sometimes when we, step across the lines, that we need to take responsibility for it, and where we can't see it, others may need to point it out to us. And when we do that, we become a church that's not made up of perfect people. I don't see one perfect person in here. My wife isn't here today. That was safe, wasn't it? Not really. She can always go on YouTube and check up on me. But instead, we gather together as God's people. And that's why Paul talks about bearing with one another. Going that extra mile. Caring about one another, even when it's hard to do that. And it's a reciprocal thing. It can't just be one way. It can't just be one person doing all the giving and one person doing all the taking. Or one person crossing the line all the time and everybody else saying, oh, that's okay. No, then there has to be some accountability for that, because otherwise that peace and that harmony that God wants in the church is going to get disrupted and broken. The church, though, is uniquely positioned when it operates the way that God created it to be. You see, because God created human beings to connect with each other. And He created the generations in which to do this. And that's why it's so important. And one of the things I think is a strength about your church is you are a multi-generational church. Most churches that I serve tend to end up on one end of the spectrum. And it's usually, in the 60-plus category. But your church has young families, young kids, more seasoned and mature other people, I'm trying to say a nice way, not saying old. And so we have that balance. And this was part of God's really awesome plan, is that we can come together. And we can be different in a good way, and we can impact this world in a good way, because we are different. We're not so busy building up our firewalls. Look at what Paul talks about here, is that God tore down the dividing wall of hostility. Where do you find those dividing walls of hostility today? They're all over the place. It can be in politics. Again, social media spills over into politics, spills over into that too. But even just in social media without politics, you can see those walls of hostility going up. In fact, it almost becomes a place for that kind of thing to flourish. It's almost become a platform for that, and normalizing and saying that's okay. I don't know about you if you ever read some of these things where, I don't know how I can say it in church. I can't say the next part, but it's where somebody writes something and they're talking about something that happened or somebody did something, and are they do you know what I'm talking about? Nod your head if you know what I'm talking about. You don't know what I'm talking about. Starts with an A. There we go. All right. So, in other words, am I the jerk? All right, we'll just put it that way, all right? And I sit there and first of all, I think, the minute you have to put that out, I'm going to say, yeah, you are. The fact that you've got to air your dirty laundry to everybody, and you got to scoop up all these people to come onto your side and say that you were right so you can tell your sister-in-law how wrong she was. To me, that right there is just being jerky. Airing your private, personal laundry to the whole world, sorry, that's just not cool. And that creates walls of hostility. And it's one of those things that other people who don't maybe engage in it but are seeing it, that just makes them want to pull back even further. The church is different. The church, and that's our first point on the outline, the church is the last multi-generational institution. The church is the last multi-generational institution. In Western civilization, the church is that last place that we can come together among the generations. And it's not an anomaly in the sense of, isn't that weird? No, this is the way God intended it to be. That we find strength and we find encouragement because we walk together with each other. We're able to do life together. And recognizing that I'm flawed, you're flawed, I make mistakes, you make mistakes, do dumb things, we do them. We're human beings. But we also understand we have that one who knows us as we truly are, better than we even know ourselves. And he still says, I think you're awesome. And you might say, how can he say that? How can he say, if he truly knows who I am and what I'm capable of, how can he truly say, I think you're awesome? It's because God loves you despite your brokenness. And God has a plan for you. And he is completely, fully committed to sticking with you. Most of us can't do that with one another. We may try really hard, but we may not be able to do it. God can, and God does. In Western civilization, the church is that last multi-generational institution. And multi-generational is just another way of saying family. It's just another way of saying family. God has created families. I think one of the things that is so discouraging at times, you think about people that you've known and who were very gifted in certain areas of their life and had great wisdom and insight. And to me, it's so difficult when someone like that I've known for a long time and they pass away, and you think all of that went with them. Because I can't give you my wisdom and experience and plant it in your heart so you can just take it on and say, boom, boom, I'm just going to start up from where he left off and I'm going to take some wisdom from here, and we just keep building on that. It doesn't work like that. The best that we have, the best that we can do is that we share that wisdom, we share that experience with one another, and family is the place where that happens best. Because if we can do it in our families, then we can spread it further out into our culture. But increasingly, family has come under fire too, hasn't it? Family is being funneled down. It's gone from extended family to nuclear family to no family, or to create your own family. And I'm not against people who really don't have a family group that they can connect with, creating family. But the problem often is there that when we create our own family, we create the opportunity we can walk away anytime we want. We see that started in our whole direction with failing marriages over the last 50 or 60 years. We are people who are generations of disposable marriages. We are serial polygamists. We just go from one to the other, and we don't realize what we're doing to ourselves, what we're doing to our children, what we're doing to the culture, and how destabilizing it is. But Satan does. He does. And this delights him. Because the more that he can break family down, the more he can isolate. And the more that we're isolated, the more likely we are to go into some really dark and bad places in our lives. When you look at individuals throughout human history, people who really were bad actors, and you look at what their family was like, maybe what their parents were like, you begin to understand what went into the making of a monster. And that maybe if this child had been in a different family situation or set of circumstances, might have been vastly different. All those qualities that they were able to use to work the system to their advantage and do horrible things, they would now still have those abilities to do good things and impact people in a powerful way. It's so important that the family be preserved and that we make, as moms and dads, every effort to hold it together, and especially in our marriages, to hold it together and to remember the promises that were made. And I think a lot of times when people get married, they think forever, but they really just hope forever, or until just hope that things go well. And we know the reality of that is things will go well, but then things are going to go sideways too. That's two human beings. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. And that's the beauty and the strength and the power of marriage, is that you make the commitments up front. And each of you know that walking away from this is not an option. And I've never seen a relationship where two people, even they can be vastly different, and they may have some real clashes in their relationship, especially at first. But when both are committed to the relationship, I've never seen that relationship fail. And it's never built on their feelings. It's always built on a promise that I'm going to be here for you. If that's true for our marriages, how much more for our families, that we're here for each other. Jesus kind of captures this concept of family going beyond biology, and that family can be created in lots of different ways. But again, the commitment has got to be there. You can't just be family when the sun is shining. You got to be there on those rainy days too. You got to be there when it's ugly and bad and you'd love to just toss the towel in and walk away and say, to heck with it. That commitment to stick to being together. And it pays off in the end. It's an investment that will pay off hugely. Let's take a look at Mark 3:34. And this is a time where Jesus is teaching a group of people, and his mom and his brothers are outside. And it's kind of funny as you read into that story, they're coming to take Jesus away. Ha ha. Some of you got that reference, didn't you? The Dr. Demento show. They're coming to take me away, ha ha. And that, I'm not kidding, that was what they thought. He was nuts. Mom, Jesus, he's off the hook. He's nuts. We got to do an intervention. We got to get him out of there, and there's something wrong with that boy. And I don't understand why Mom was there, I don't know if she was going along with this. Maybe she's trying to be that tempering influence and maybe bringing the kids together and maybe having a family discussion about what family. I don't know, but it's just interesting. They're out there. And so people say, hey, your mom and your brothers are outside. They want to talk to you. And here's what Jesus says. He looked at those seated in a circle around him and he said, here are my mother and my brothers. And this has powerful application for what we're doing right here. Here are my brothers and sisters, my mothers and my fathers, my children. Right here. Right here. What an awesome thing that is. And Jesus says that we are his brothers and sisters. That's a pretty incredible commitment. Jesus came to bring people together as God created us to be, the church, is his toolbox for accomplishing that. And the tools in that toolbox are you. We're the tools in God's toolbox. So if we're looking at trying to fix culture, God's got to get out his toolbox, right? The toolbox of St. Paul's Lutheran Church and a lot of other Christian churches in the area are part of his toolbox. And let's see, which tools do I want to use today? Now, I know tools has become a rather negative word. To be called a tool is not a good thing. Especially if you're a guy. Oh, he's a tool, all right. But we're looking at this from God's perspective. Something that God can use. That special tool that does the job, that makes it a lot easier, that you might have to try using a lot of other tools to make that one thing work, whereas if you just had the special tool for it, it's a piece of cake. A 5-minute job becomes a 2-hour job without the right tool. And so we are the tools in God's toolbox for fixing the culture right around here. You're part of it. God wants to use you. You are literally his handiwork. So when I think of tools, I often think of hand tools. They fit in our hands. They're what we need to get the job done. And that's what God's saying. You're what I need to get the job done. And not just as separate individual tools, but collectively, we can do a lot. God is that master craftsman. He puts churches together, fills it with the right people to use in just the right way so you can get lots of things done. The church, and that's our next point on the outline, the church often self-segregates the generations. It's true. We often create segregated slots in our church lives. We have youth, then we have the singles, and then we have the young marrieds, and then we have the family with small children, and then we have, and then all the way up to the seasoned ones. And it's good for us to know that there are places where we connect in a group that is very much like us, but it's also important to know that we connect together with people who aren't like us, and that we actually benefit from it. I think of the years where my kids were little. I don't know about you guys, but especially those of you who have kids that are still, under your roof right now, and you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, how much longer is this going to go on? Just want you to know your kids are thinking the same thing. And but isn't it an interesting thing? Once we get past that time, and we look back, and I think of all the times I was able to have with my kids, and I miss those times. Oh, I love the times I have with my kids now. They're adults, so it's a lot more. I don't know. It's always a new phase. It's always a new stage. I remember when my son, he's the oldest, obviously the first child, and so, I can remember him going through different phases, and each phase was really kind of cool, And there were certain things that they would do in that stage. It's like, oh man, and then they grow out of it. And you're sort of like, oh. And you sort of feel that ache for what has been. I'm not going to say unburdened by what has been. I'm just going to say you remember what has been, and you look back with that with longing. And one of the things I was thinking about, man, I was telling my wife, this is just, oh man, I mean, yeah, it is. And this is kind of sad, and she says, but Jim, there's something new around the corner, and it was really true. So something new comes to replace it to such an extent that some of those really super cute things my kids used to, I don't remember them anymore. And it wouldn't be cute at 35 if my son was doing that now. Just be weird, creepy. Things our kids would say that you knew you should correct, but you didn't. I can remember my son, I hope he's not watching this, but one of the things that he saw the name Antoine, and he was convinced it was pronounced Antoine. And it was really cute, so we didn't correct him for a while, And then finally I said, Tom, that's not how you pronounce that name. Yes, it is. I said, no, it's Antoine. It's a French name. It just sounds No, it's Antoine. Okay. He doesn't call him Antoine anymore, okay? He did grow out of that. But that's what I'm talking about, things like that. But then also other things like the daily round of things that are so challenging right now for you parents that have kids at home, the daily round of life. And I can tell you that when you get beyond that and you're like, yes, that'll be a great time. And it is. I'm not going to lie. It is a great time. But you will look back on that time too and you'll say, man, I wouldn't mind having a week of that back. Probably not much more than a week, but maybe a week. You see, generations are what God has built into our culture and our society, and it's meant to be a good thing. It's not meant to be a, hey, you get off my lawn, that old cranky guy or gal. It's not meant to be divisive. It's meant to, how can we learn from each other? What are some of the things that we can gain from it? True story, because it happened right here. And I remember, talking to Sadie. And she was 101 at this point. I figured once you hit 101, you got to know something, right? And I was talking with Sadie, and I said, Sadie, it seems like to me, when I was really young, like a kid, it took forever for a year to go by. How many of you remember that? Like when you were 5 or 6 years old, man, a year was like forever. You tell them, we'll do that next year. Like next year might as well be 100 years from now when you're a kid. And I got to thinking, it's because as a kid, you've only lived this little slice of life. And so a year is a huge chunk of that slice of life that you've lived. So it seems like a long time. And that was what I was bouncing off of her. Am I right? Or am I on the right track? And I said, but then as you get older, I said, Sadie, when I got about to 36 or 37, all of a sudden it started picking up. And a year would go by pretty quick. And I said, now I'm at this point, and it's like, it's just ripping by. And she's like, yeah, that's exactly how it is. That's exactly. So there was wisdom there. Just going to someone who's been around long enough to say, yeah, that's exactly how it is. Somebody told me life is like a roll of toilet paper. I'm just going to stop there and let you try to figure out what I mean by that. But no, I'm not. And that's what they told me. Pastor, life is like a roll of toilet paper. I said, okay, I'll bite. Because I was thinking in a little bit different way. And they said, because the closer you get to the end of it, the faster it spins. I said, whoa, that's really true. It's like when it's this big, it seems like it takes forever to get to the halfway point. Once you get to the halfway point, it's like, oh, I need another roll of toilet paper. Life goes by really quick. Who thought we'd have a discussion on toilet paper in church? Are we not culturally relevant or what? But what we often do in the church is segregate the generations. We put people into different slots and categories. And that's okay in certain situations. But we should also be able to come together as God's people. And unfortunately, the church has been influenced by these destructive patterns and this direction of isolation and self-isolation that our culture is picking up on. And that shouldn't be surprising to us because we're part of the culture too. We live in the culture. And so that culture is touching us, and we often bring that into the church with us. What we need to do is lift it up to God and say, God, you touch this. You help us with it. We're going to take a look at Ephesians 2:19. We read that part of that just earlier, but we're going to be taking a look at that specific verse next. So it's good for churches to have specific and age-appropriate activities and ministries and programs, but it's also just as important to have programs that bring us all together. That was why I was really excited last month when we did the movie night. That was really fun. And I want to thank Laura for taking leadership on that and rolling with it. Because it was really neat. We went over here. They had it all set up kind of like a movie theater. They had red vines, I think we had Milk Duds, Snickers, M&Ms with peanuts, all the good stuff that you go to a movie for, right? We even had a popcorn machine, like a real popcorn machine, and we had a great movie to watch together. And what was kind of neat is it was a multi-generational thing. And I was just talking to Laura this morning. I said, we had been talking before that we need to do more of this kind of thing. And so I want to encourage some of you, too, to come alongside Laura and help her with some of this stuff. Because the more that you invest yourself into doing these kinds of things, the more fun you will have. And the more enjoyable it is. And the more that we do stuff together as a family, as a multi-generational family, the more blessings we're going to have. I can remember as a kid growing up in my church, and the stuff that we did, like we had church picnics, we did all sorts of different stuff back in, and I can still think back on those things and say, those were really fun times. You get to know people a lot better when you're outside of the sanctuary. Wouldn't you agree? You're not being unfaithful to say that. How are you going to get to interact right now, right? Because I'm the guy up talking, and everything is sort of, yeah, we do stuff corporately together, but we don't do a lot together until we get over here afterwards and have some fellowship time, which is great. It's really a great thing. But I sometimes find that when we get beyond even the church and we do stuff together, say like a softball game or a baseball game, it's pretty fun. We have a lot of good time. We talk smack. And, reputations are made and destroyed. No, I'm just teasing. As we get together, we have those fun things like families have together. Here's what Paul says in Ephesians 2:19. So now you Gentiles are no longer strangers and foreigners. You are citizens along with all of God's holy people. You are members of God's family. That's what we have to offer to this community, is that they can be a part of our family. Do we have space in our hearts, not in our church, do we have space in our hearts to let others in? Are we willing to broaden ourselves out beyond just our biological families and friendships that we have here at the church? Are we big enough at heart to say, we want more people to be and come and be a part of us, and we want to welcome them, and we know that we have to go the extra mile. When someone is a guest coming to worship with us, we know that we have to go the extra mile to be the good hosts and hostesses and help people along, because they're kind of coming into this. They don't know exactly where the footing is at. That's where we need to come along and help them and be with them and strengthen them. This is what knocks down that dividing wall of uncertainty, of going to another church. You know, most people make up their minds as to whether they're going to come back to a church in the first 5 minutes. That's long before the pastor even gets up and says anything. A lot of decisions are made even as they're driving by the church. I've seen that. Let's go to church there this morning, and they drive by and they take a look. Well, maybe not. It starts from the moment that people hit your door, and even before they hit your door. So it's great that you guys are doing the greeting, putting greeters out there. And that's where you really do want to put your brightest and best and most friendly people. Because that's the face that people are going to see first, and that's where people are going to feel welcome and engaged. Paul reminds us here that we are members of God's family. And God is always looking to expand the family. It's not up to us to determine what that expansion looks like. That's God's thing. Our last point on the outline is this. Church is meant to bring the generations together. The church is meant to bring the generations together. It really is. God invented this thing, especially coming out of the brokenness of which sin and death have brought into our world. That multi-generational concept is God's way of providing some form of continuity so that we can learn from previous generations. And we can learn from upcoming generations too. Come on, let's face it. How many of you here have asked your grandchild to set up your phone for you? You don't have to raise your hands. I'm not into the shaming business. But just think about that. And beyond that, there's a lot of things that they see the world. You might say, it's kind of, I don't know, you know. Yeah, but they see the world in a kind of a unique way. Maybe you used to see it that way too. And that's all pretty good as you get along and you connect together. We, the church, have to look for and listen for ways to bring the generations back together. In a culture that is rapidly destroying itself, we're eating ourselves alive. We have got to be that different story. We've got to be that anomaly. And the more that this happens, the more strange the church is going to look. To the culture, it's normal for us. We know that. But to the world beyond it, they look at it and say, that's weird. Until they are exposed to it. Until they experience what it's like to be loved unconditionally. To be accepted, even if they are different. Doesn't matter. There's plenty of room in our hearts. And if we need more seats, we'll put some more seats in. Our hearts are big enough, we can knock down walls. And we can go literally bigger. How cool would that be? It's all things that God can and wants to do. Ephesians 2:20 says this. Together, we are His house, meaning God's house. Together, all right? All of us, not just some of us, all of us. Together, we are His house, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets. And the cornerstone is who? It's Jesus Christ Himself. Jesus is the cornerstone. We cannot build anything other than what Jesus has already built into us. We are building on Him. We're building on Him. And everything that we do needs to be an outgrowth of Him. He's the master craftsman, the master electrician, the master builder. He's the one that's mastered it all. And He knows exactly how He wants St. Paul's to be. And by His grace, we're working in those directions, allowing Him to work in and through us. The cross and Jesus' death on it shows us that not only does our relationship with God need to be repaired, and we know that He's already done it. We know that God's repaired the relationship. And that when things come along and we disrupt that and we break faith with God, God doesn't break faith with us. But He provides us a solution. We come back and we say, God, please, man, forgive me for that. And God, of course, always says, yes, yes. I love you beyond the stupid things you do. I love you beyond the stuff that you don't even love yourself about. Because I know who you are. And I know what sin does in you. And it doesn't please me. But you please me. And I care more about you than your sin. And with your sin, we'll work together. We'll deal with it. I will help you. I will bring healing to you, if you let me. I think that's something the world around us could benefit by, if we emulate it. Not only does our relationship, as we see that with God, often needs to be repaired, but our connection to one another in all generations also needs to be repaired. There's strength when the church recognizes its need for all the generations to give to each other and to derive strength from each other. I call it the exponential power, the spiritual power of God. What I mean by that is exponential is it's not just there's, let's say, 80 of us in the room right now. It's not just 80 people. It's the exponential power of one person and another person, and then you add another person into that. It's not just times 80, it's exponentially powerful what God can do, because when you think about it, we're all being made up. We've used the image of a toolbox, but think of it more now like a clock with all of its independent, different little pieces and parts, and yet they all have to work together. And if one part doesn't work, that clock isn't going to work. We're intricately designed for each other. That's what I mean by that exponential power. We're able to do so much more than just 80 individual people can do. We can do a whole lot more than we can even begin to imagine right now. That's that exponential power. That's because God is at the heart of it. He's using the church to bring the generations together, not blow them apart. Bring us together. Find the strengths that we have in our generations and roll with those. And not look down on the youth because they're young, and don't look down on the elderly because they're elderly. But instead to see each other as the unique creations that we are, and what we can gain and what we can learn from one another. So here are today's big takeaways. First of all, the multi-generational church recognizes that it really is the last multi-generational institution alive in our culture. And it's the last institution that values and protects a multi-generational approach to family, to the world. Our next big takeaway is this: the multi-generational church understands. So it's recognized where it's at. It also understands that integration and not segregation, that we need to be taking more in, not isolating ourselves further from our culture. That integration and not segregation are the key to healthy churches and families, and by extension, communities. And finally, in recognizing this and understanding this, the multi-generational church responds by actively seeking to bring the generations together to learn, to grow, and to be blessed by one another. That's why I wanted to promote this monthly, let's get together, let's do something all together that we can all enjoy and all have a fun time doing. And in building together, we find our strength and what God can do in and through us. And all God's people said, amen.